So we're going to go to Danni Fortune. Danni is originally from Cape Town, South Africa. Danni left in her late teens to come to the UK, where she met her husband, Joshua. They live in Woolwich, London, where Joshua is the pastor there in the Congregational Church. They have 3 lovely young sons, Jacob, Jonathan, and Jesse. Danni has worked as pastoral officer for Mission Care, a network of Christian-run homes in southeast London. So we're really thankful, Danni, for your agreeing to share your testimony of God's grace in your life and how the Lord saved you and has been guiding your life up until now. So we'll go to Danni now.
Hi, ladies. It's so nice to see all your faces. So I grew up in a Christian home and knew from a young age about Jesus. I prayed to him as a little girl and never once doubted that he was God. My dad was a pastor and a missionary, so I never really found roots anywhere. The most difficult move was when I was 12. We packed up, left my hometown of Cape Town, South Africa, to move to the island of St. Helena, population 4,000. It was like stepping back in time. There was no TV, and the only way to get there was by ship, which took 5 days. I was awfully bullied, being the only pale girl in school, after being told I was either too fat or ugly to live. After some time of this happening, my parents decided it would be better for me to be homeschooled. I remember the first time the gospel hit me between the eyes. Normally, I would climb up to the church balcony, which was no longer used, to have a quick snooze. But during the service, this time, it was different. I could not shut my eyes. It was like I was the only one in the room. God was speaking to me. My dad preached on time, and if we knew what tomorrow holds, would we be ready to meet Jesus right now if tomorrow never came? I knew I wasn't ready. Immediately after the service, I ran to my father and mother and asked them what I needed to do to be saved. And I committed my life to God and was baptized at the age of 12. After 3 long years on the island, we came back home to South Africa, Cape Town. I was 14 and so excited to be back with my family and to go to a normal high school. And in this time, I knew the Lord had laid on my heart not to date. He wanted me to wait for him to provide. But being a young teenage girl and having watched far too many rom-coms, all I wanted was a boyfriend. This was the beginning of my rebellion. I did not trust him to provide. I put my relationship with God on the shelf, and I told myself that I'd have all my fun now, and then when I got old, I would live for him. And so I did. Relationship after relationship, drinking, partying, drugs, I did it all. But in all this, I could not escape God. Whatever I was doing, I knew he was there. I would be at a party and I'd go to the bathroom and cry out to him, "Forgive me." And the guilt was often unbearable. I kept going to church and I kept wearing my Sunday best mask, but inside I was breaking. At 16, I got a job at a video shop, and one day a man came in to ask for some water. I went around the corner to get him some, but when I turned around, he was there. I had always told myself that in that moment I would be able to fight off an attacker, but before I knew it, I was on the floor with his hands around my neck and my body going numb. In that moment, I knew that I would be facing a God that I had told to wait, a God that I had rejected. I cried out, "Jesus, save me." And miraculously, a girl was playing in the quiet alleyway behind the shop, and she had heard my screams. When I woke up, they told me they didn't know how I'd survived, but I knew God had given me a second chance. After about a year, and this case not even making it to court with the corrupt South African justice system, my mom and dad decided it was better for me to move to the UK where my older brother lived. My parents would have to stay in South Africa in order to support me financially, so I would need to live without them. At 17, I was living with my cousin and his family in Stony Stratford, Milton Keynes. Some of you may know it. I wanted to follow the Lord, and this time I thought it would be completely different. He had given me a second chance at life, but being 17, working and going to college, I began to fall into my old ways, partying but still attending church on a Sunday. And then I met a guy, and it became very serious very quickly. I told God all the usual things, that I would take him to church. He would become a Christian. I wouldn't change and I wouldn't compromise, but I did, and we ended up sleeping together. It's ironic though, because I remember rolling my eyes at reading about the Israelites in the Old Testament, about their repeated foolishness, going around in circles again and again, and yet here I was doing the exact same thing. In this time, my dad received a call to be a pastor in the UK. I was so happy to have my mom and dad back with me. I had all the comfort I could need and quickly pushed God to the back of my mind. But it was coming to a point where I was not only making a decision for myself, but for another too. My parents had moved and I decided I would go to be with them. But it wasn't even a month before I realized that something was different. I took a pregnancy test quietly in the public bathroom, and I remember seeing the positive signs so clearly. I was 18, had left my job and college, and I was pregnant. I phoned my friend at the time, and she had an answer quicker than I could even think. I know a clinic in London that can help you, and I'll catch a train to meet you there. The next day, I met her at the station, and we had our plan. But as we began to walk to the clinic, I kept thinking of the film that my mom and dad had shown me, The Silent Scream. If any of you haven't watched it, I recommend watching it. And if you have any teenagers, I recommend showing them too. It shows the true horror of abortion. So I decided I would not go through with it. And I told my boyfriend, and he came through to meet me. The hardest part was my father finding out. I told my mom, and she told him. You see, I was my daddy's girl, and I thought he would reject me or turn me out. But after the tears and me screaming, he just held me, and that was grace in action. My parents received a call to a church in Southeast London, and God was moving in me. I realized that the decision I was making was not just for my life, but affected the baby who was being knitted together inside of me. And as the Lord drew me closer to him, I began to see a clear difference in myself and the father of the child. My idea of what I wanted out of life had completely changed. And being as young as we both were, he wanted something completely different and made it very clear he didn't want God. This led me to a very difficult decision. I would have to leave him, even if it meant being a single mother at the age of 18. I put God first, and it felt like the first time in my life that I was putting my trust entirely in him. I had put all thoughts of men and relationships to the back of my mind. I just wanted to follow God and keep my baby boy safe. But this didn't mean I didn't fear it all. There were many nights when I would be in floods of tears at the thought of my baby growing up without a father. I was terrified of being a mother, what it looked like, and would I be able to do it on my own? Would he hate me one day for the decisions I had made being so young? But in those times of prayer, I constantly had an assurance from God. I knew clearly I had to trust and obey. I prayed for provision, even though I could not see a way. A few months had passed, and we were living in the house belonging to the church. And there was a knock at the door, and a handsome, if I may say so myself, man was at the door, and he asked to see my dad. He was the son of the previous pastor and was back on leave from Afghanistan. I remember just being drawn to him, but never let myself think anything of it. A month later, I received a message from him asking if I wanted to go for coffee. In my head, I thought he felt sorry for me and had no idea there was anything more. That coffee turned into lunch, which turned into dinner, and by the end of the evening, my heart was feeling something it had never felt before. 3 months later, we were engaged. Even the birth of Jacob, my son, was a situation in which God showed his amazing faithfulness. Josh and I had given up any hope of him being there for the birth. He wasn't due his leave time for another 3 months. One night, before he was dropped into Taliban territory on a big mission, I went into premature labor. We both felt at breaking points, but God was with us. The doctors stopped the baby coming with hormone patches, and Josh's boss and colleagues felt so sorry for him that they allowed him to come back for a week after the mission. The baby was now due. We tried everything to bring on labor. We went on swings, ate the hottest curries that we could find, but nothing worked. And Josh went home each night. We wanted to honor God with our bodies. But it was the night before Josh had to fly back, and we struggled not to question God, why he had brought us so near, yet so far, to Josh being there for the birth. But guess what? Baby Jacob came that night. And he came so quickly that he was born in the church house, in Josh's old bedroom. Josh even got to cut the cord so that he can always say to Jacob, who's now 11, that he has always been there, even since the birth. God answered our hopes and our prayers in a way we couldn't even understand. A year later, Josh returned from Afghanistan and we got married. Whenever I look at the diamond ring on my engagement ring, I am reminded of God's grace, how so often he gives us more than we could ever imagine or even deserve. Normally, the credits would roll at this part of the film. But the reality is that when we got married, it won't come as a surprise that we didn't really know each other. Even though we were engaged for a year, the vast majority of that time, we weren't in the same country, as he had to finish his time in Afghanistan. We spoke regularly over Skype and did Bible studies together, but as we all know from this year of a lot of digital communication, it's no substitute for a real relationship. So I had in my head an idea that marriage would be perfect. He would love and adore me, and I would bake cakes. I can't bake for the life of me. But the more I craved this idea, the more I realized that he was a man and that this wasn't a Disney film. Jesus was the only savior, not Josh. Jesus is the only one who can satisfy my needs, and Jesus is the only one I could find my identity in, not marriage. We both came to a point where it was either give up or throw yourselves on him, and we did just that. 10 years down the line and 3 babies later, by God's grace, I can say that I love Josh now more than I ever did. And even though we didn't know each other well, God could not have chosen a better man for me to spend my life with. Josh has taught me so much about myself and about Christ. I thought I knew what I wanted in a man, but man, I got so wrong. Once again, I believe this shows God knows our needs and our desires more than even we do. I really do believe that God has a sense of humor. At a young age, I said I would never be a pastor's wife. I had seen the hard work, the tears and the pain and the scenes behind the scenes, and I didn't want it for myself. But Josh had felt called to ministry in 2009 when we were both dating. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. This didn't really go any further as we just couldn't afford to go to Bible college at the time. As God was molding us through many different things, Josh was asked to help preach at a church that was struggling in Woolwich. We would go as a family once per month as Josh preached, and I would lead the creche. There was never really a point where we thought this was it. We were now pastor and pastor's wife, but gradually we fell in love with the people there. And in 2014, they asked if we would consider joining the church as the official pastor and pastor's wife. We knew what God wanted us to do. I suddenly became aware of my age and every area that I was lacking in. At the same time, I had started a job on a pastoral team working in care homes. I would have to support and encourage residents with dementia and end of life, but also their families. In the first few weeks of being there, I made lifelong friendships with the residents as I shared the gospel with 80 to 90-year-olds who had never heard the message of Christ before. It was so exciting, but nothing could prepare me for death after death after death. It was a part of my job, and I needed to remind them of the hope of Jesus. But inside, I myself was struggling to see that hope in all the suffering. After a few months of not really dealing with what was going on inside of me, I came to a breaking point. I couldn't sleep, and when I did, I would wake up screaming in a pool of sweat. The attack that happened in South Africa when I was 16 would play again and again in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I was scared to sleep. I would go into work only having had a few hours of sleep, and then be holding the hands of loved ones who had moments before lost their husband or wife. I would point them to scriptures of hope, but internally ask, do I believe that God is good? Do I believe God is worthy of trust when all is fading and pain is everywhere? I asked God why he was making me relive something so painful in a time that I needed to be strong. Why did he want me to be a pastor's wife or a counsel when I was so weak and so unsuitable to the roles he had called me to? It didn't take long until Josh realized what was happening to me. It is something he had seen many times before in war, PTSD. As I relived those moments of the attack again and again, I started to remember parts of it that I had blocked out of my memory for all those years. God wanted me to deal with it now. I poured myself onto Jesus. Only he could heal me. Only he could give me the strength, and only he could put me back together again. It was like he had to strip me back of everything to begin this ministry, to make me realize it was all about him. I didn't have to have all the answers because he does. I do not have to be the perfect pastor's wife, but he is perfect. I do not have to have all the strength. He is my strength. And as long as I keep remembering that, whatever I face, I can do so with him. I'm reminded of Moses when he was called to return to Egypt and the way he protested to God that he wasn't good enough for the job and that others were more suited to it. But God's reply to Moses was, I am. You see, it's not about us, it's about him. Paul talks about his struggles and that Christ didn't take away his problem, but said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. This is something I am learning every day, as every day has a new struggle. If I can leave one message from my story, it's this. God can be trusted. No matter what life brings, when you feel weak or that you cannot find the strength, he will carry you. If you are married and finding it not to be what you thought it would be, if you are sick and struggling to see God's purpose in your suffering, if you are lonely, if you are anxious, if you are fearful of the future, I promise you, our God is faithful, and all he calls us to do is trust. Whatever you are facing today, wherever God has called you in your life, pour yourself onto him, and he will show himself worthy of your trust. Thank you.